What would you do if your life was ripped apart in an instant, accused of a crime you didn't commit? For one man, this nightmare became his reality. And for another, it was the start of a journey he never expected. Before we continue, please let us know where you are watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The sun cast a warm golden glow over the quiet suburban street, where children's laughter mingled with the hum of morning activity. The Carter household, a modest two-story home with a neatly trimmed lawn, radiated an air of stability and love. Inside, James Carter was finishing breakfast with his 10-year-old daughter, Maya. He sipped his coffee, smiling as Maya excitedly described the art project she was presenting in school that day. "Daddy, can you come see it later?" "It's about superheroes," she said, her eyes wide with anticipation. James chuckled, ruffling her curly hair. "I'll try, sweetheart. But even if I can't, I know you'll do amazing." His wife, Angela, packed Maya's lunch in the kitchen, smiling at the exchange. Their mornings were always a symphony of love and routine, each note played in harmony. But as James kissed his daughter's forehead and prepared to leave, a sharp knock echoed through the house, shattering the calm. James opened the door to find two uniformed officers standing on the porch. One of them, Officer Ethan Brooks, held up a warrant. "Mr. Carter, we need you to come with us." "You're under arrest for armed robbery," Ethan said, his tone cold and detached. James's breath caught in his throat. "What? There must be some mistake. I haven't—" "Step outside, sir," Ethan interrupted, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Angela appeared behind James, her face pale with shock. "What's going on?" "James, what are they talking about?" Maya peeked around the corner, her small voice trembling. "Daddy?" James turned to his family, his heart breaking at their fear. "It's okay, Angela. I'll figure this out. Maya, be brave for me, okay?" He stepped outside, his wrists bound in cold metal as neighbors began to gather. Phones appeared, recording the scene. The officers led him to the squad car, and James could feel the weight of judgment from every gaze. The shame was unbearable, but his resolve to clear his name burned brighter. The ride to the station was silent. Ethan's partner, Officer Daniels, glanced at him nervously. "Are we sure about this? I mean, the evidence is a little thin." Ethan gripped the wheel tightly. "We have a positive ID and a matching description. That's enough for an arrest." Daniels hesitated. "I don't know, Brooks. Something feels off." Ethan didn't respond. He focused on the road, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had spent years building a reputation as a dedicated officer, and he wasn't about to let doubt cloud his judgment. Yet, as he glanced at James in the rearview mirror, something flickered in his mind, a nagging question he couldn't shake. At the station, James was booked and placed in a holding cell. The sterile walls and harsh fluorescent lights felt suffocating. He paced the small space, replaying the morning's events in his mind. How could this happen? He had been at a community fundraiser the night of the robbery, surrounded by dozens of witnesses. The accusation was absurd. Hours passed before James was allowed a phone call. He dialed Angela, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "I'm okay," he reassured her. "Get the lawyer we talked about for emergencies. I'll need him." Angela's voice wavered. "James, everyone's talking about the video. It's all over the internet. People are saying horrible things." James closed his eyes, fighting back anger and despair. "Don't listen to them. The truth will come out." Meanwhile, Ethan sat at his desk, poring over the case file. The evidence, a grainy security video and a shaky eyewitness account, felt less solid with each passing moment. His gut told him something wasn't right, but his training insisted otherwise. Officers couldn't afford to second-guess themselves. As he reviewed the footage again, Daniels approached. "You need to see this," he said, placing a tablet on the desk. It displayed a video of the arrest, now viral, with captions accusing the police of racial profiling. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Great. Just what we need." Daniels lowered his voice. "Brooks, if we got this wrong, it's going to blow up in our faces. Maybe we should—" "We didn't get it wrong," Ethan snapped. "Let's focus on building the case." But doubt lingered in his mind, a shadow he couldn't shake. That night, Maya lay in bed clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Angela sat beside her, trying to soothe her daughter's fears. "Daddy's strong, Maya. He'll come home soon," Angela whispered, though her own heart was heavy with worry. Maya nodded, but her small voice carried a weight beyond her years. "Why did they take him? Daddy didn't do anything wrong." Angela pulled her daughter close, unable to answer. All she could do was hope that the truth would prevail, and that the man she loved would come back to them unbroken. As James sits alone in his cell, staring at the bare walls, he silently vows to fight for his innocence, for his family, and for the truth. Across town, Ethan stares at the case file on his desk, the flickering glow of his computer screen casting long shadows in the dim room. Two men, bound by a moment of injustice, stand on the precipice of a journey that will change their lives forever. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos and emotion of the outside world. Its walls, painted a sterile beige, were lined with benches filled with curious onlookers, reporters, and supporters for James Carter. The sound of whispered conversations hummed like white noise as the judge entered, silencing the room with the bang of a gavel. All eyes turned to James as he was led to the defense table, his posture upright, his expression calm but resolute. Beside him, his lawyer, Patricia Langston, exuded a fierce confidence that set the stage for what would become a battle for truth. Across the aisle sat Officer Ethan Brooks. Though he wore civilian clothes, his badge hung heavily in his pocket, a silent reminder of the life he had sworn to uphold. Ethan avoided James's gaze, his stomach churning with unease. He had been so sure of his decision to arrest James, but now, as he prepared to testify, doubt gnawed at him like a relentless tide. The prosecution wasted no time in painting a grim picture. They described James as a man of dual lives, a community leader by day and a criminal mastermind by night. The lead prosecutor, Thomas Graves, relied heavily on the grainy security footage, arguing that the figure in the video matched James's height and build. He emphasized the eyewitness testimony from the shopkeeper, whose description, though vague, had initially pointed to James. Graves gestured toward the jury, his voice rising with dramatic flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. This man was identified at the scene of the crime, and his actions have left a community shaken. We must ensure justice is served." The jury exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Patricia, however, remained unfazed. She leaned over to James and whispered, "Don't worry. This is just noise. We'll dismantle it piece by piece." When it was Patricia's turn, her approach was measured and deliberate. She began by addressing the jury directly, her voice calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution would have you believe that my client, James Carter, a man with an impeccable record, would jeopardize everything he has built for his family and community to commit a reckless crime. But what you will see is that their evidence is not only flawed, it's non-existent." She began dismantling the prosecution's case, starting with the security footage. An expert witness took the stand, a digital forensic specialist who explained how the camera's angle and resolution made it impossible to accurately identify the suspect. The footage, they revealed, had a documented history of malfunction, further discrediting its reliability. Patricia then turned her attention to the shopkeeper's testimony. On cross-examination, she gently but firmly exposed inconsistencies in his account. "Mr. Jacobs," she began, "you stated earlier that you saw a man running from the scene and later identified him as James Carter. Can you confirm how far away you were when you saw this individual?" The shopkeeper hesitated. About 50 feet, maybe more." 50 feet. And was it daytime or nighttime?" "It was nighttime." "And the streetlights in the area, were they fully operational?" Jacobs's face reddened. Not all of them, no." Patricia's tone remained neutral, but her words struck with precision. "So, to clarify, you were 50 feet away at night with limited lighting, and you're confident enough to swear that the man you saw was my client?" Jacobs shifted uncomfortably. I thought it looked like him." "You thought?" "Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. No further questions." As the trial progressed, Patricia introduced critical evidence that shattered the prosecution's case. Witnesses from the community fundraiser testified that James was present at the event during the time of the robbery. They provided photos and timestamp videos showing James delivering a speech and interacting with attendees. The alibi was airtight. But the most damning blow to the prosecution came when DNA evidence from the crime scene was revealed. The forensic expert testified that none of the genetic material matched James. Instead, it pointed to a known felon who had been apprehended weeks after James's arrest. Gasps filled the courtroom. James's supporters erupted into murmurs of relief and vindication, while the prosecution scrambled to regain footing. Graves attempted to pivot, but the damage was done. The judge called for order, her tone sharp as she addressed the courtroom. Finally, it was Ethan's turn to take the stand. The courtroom fell silent as he walked to the witness box, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his choices. Under oath, he recounted the events leading to James's arrest. Patricia's cross-examination was unrelenting. "Officer Brooks," she began, "you testified that you reviewed all available evidence before making the arrest. Is that correct?" "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice steady but subdued. "And yet, you proceeded with an arrest based on a grainy video and a single eyewitness account that you now know was unreliable. Do you believe that was sufficient to justify depriving my client of his freedom?" Ethan hesitated. "At the time, I believed it was the right decision. And now?" Patricia pressed. Ethan's voice wavered. "Now I'm not so sure." Patricia let the words hang in the air, their weight sinking into the minds of the jury. No further questions. After days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Hours later, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted in applause, and James collapsed into his seat, overcome with emotion. Patricia placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder as tears streamed down his face. Outside, a crowd of supporters cheered as James exited the courthouse, holding Maya's hand tightly. Reporters swarmed him, but he focused only on his family, their embrace a shield against the chaos. Ethan watched from a distance, his badge in hand. The realization of his mistakes weighed heavily on him, and for the first time he questioned the system he had dedicated his life to. As James disappeared into the crowd, Ethan turned and walked away, unsure of what the future held but knowing he could no longer turn a blind eye to the flaws he had once ignored. The courtroom reckoning had ended, but the journey for justice and redemption was far from over. The morning sun broke over the courthouse steps, its light casting long shadows on the faces of those gathered outside. Though the trial was over, its ripples were only beginning to spread. James Carter, freshly acquitted, stood amidst a throng of supporters. The air buzzed with the energy of triumph, but James's face betrayed the emotional toll of the past weeks. Holding Maya's hand tightly, he looked out at the crowd with gratitude, yet his eyes revealed a quiet determination. This was not the end of the journey. Back home, the Carter family struggled to adjust to their new reality. Though the legal battle was won, James's life would never be the same. His arrest had been splashed across headlines, and though he was exonerated, public opinion was slow to catch up. Whispers lingered in his neighborhood, some neighbors still casting suspicious glances. James, however, refused to dwell on bitterness. He turned his focus to advocacy, reaching out to organizations that worked with wrongfully accused individuals. Soon he was standing at rallies and speaking to audiences about his experience, his voice resonating with raw emotion and unyielding hope. "This isn't just my story," he said at one event, standing before a crowd holding signs demanding justice reform. "It's the story of countless people whose voices have been silenced. Together, we can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Angela and Maya watched from the sidelines, their hearts swelling with pride. Maya, inspired by her father's resilience, began writing essays about social justice for her school assignments, her words brimming with passion beyond her years. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Brooks found himself adrift. His once sterling reputation was now tarnished, his confidence shattered. The disciplinary hearing came swiftly, with the department's internal affairs unit investigating the arrest. Ethan's actions were deemed a breach of protocol, and though his intentions weren't malicious, the consequences were severe. He was suspended without pay and faced mandatory retraining. The public scrutiny was unrelenting. Ethan's name became synonymous with systemic failures, and his once supportive peers now kept their distance. At home, he faced the strained silence of his wife and the innocent questions of his young son, who couldn't understand why his father wasn't wearing his uniform anymore. But amid the wreckage, Ethan began to reflect. Late nights were spent poring over articles, books, and videos about racial bias and systemic injustice. He reached out to a local community group for dialogue, sitting in on meetings where he listened, truly listened, to the voices of those who had suffered under the weight of prejudice. Months later, fate brought James and Ethan face to face once more. It was at a community event aimed at bridging gaps between law enforcement and the local population. James had been invited to speak, and Ethan had come as part of his own effort to rebuild and understand. When James spotted Ethan across the room, his body tensed instinctively. But then he saw something different in the officer's demeanor, a humility that hadn't been there before. Ethan approached cautiously. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice hesitant. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I made a mistake and I've spent every day since trying to learn from it." James studied him for a long moment, the tension thick in the air. Finally he spoke, his tone measured. "Forgiveness isn't something I can just give, Officer Brooks. It's something you have to earn. But showing up here, it's a start." The two men shook hands, their grip firm but laden with the weight of what had transpired. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step toward healing. In the months that followed, James and Ethan's paths crossed again, this time intentionally. They began working together on community initiatives, using their shared experience as a platform for dialogue. Ethan became a vocal advocate for reform within the police department, pushing for mandatory bias training and greater accountability. James, meanwhile, continued to speak out, his story becoming a rallying cry for change. Their unlikely partnership drew media attention, and while some criticized James for working with the man who had wronged him, he remained steadfast. "Change doesn't happen in echo chambers," James said in an interview. "It happens when we confront the uncomfortable and work through it together." The final scene unfolds at a park on a sunny afternoon. Families gather, children's laughter ringing through the air. James watches Maya play with a group of kids, her laughter a reminder of everything he had fought for. Beside him, Angela sits with a contented smile, the weight of their ordeal finally lifting. Ethan arrives, this time out of uniform with his own son in tow. The two men exchange a nod, their connection unspoken but understood. They sit together on a bench, watching their children play, their conversation reflective. "Do you think we'll ever fix this?" Ethan asks, his voice tinged with uncertainty. James takes a moment before responding. "Not overnight. But every step forward counts. As long as we keep walking, we'll get there." If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters.